Next one, the job of the writer is to illuminate what is hidden. So, historical associations with the rise of industrialization and realism. Industrial changes in the 19th century precipitated a trend towards writing that depicted real life. So, many of the early novels were saying, hey, we can use fiction here to depict, right, what real life is like. In particular, you can think about what does industrial change mean? Okay, well, it doesn't mean just like, yay, we have more products and more things to buy. It also means we have kids working in factories for many, 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 many hours and then losing limbs. Okay, we have whole villages, okay, areas getting changes. You have migrations of people. Okay, in particular, the plight of those that are kind of the industrial workers. So many of those that come along with the novel want to try to depict and use the novel to show what's really going on in society. Now, last one. On the morning of April 4th, 1862, part one of Les Miserables, called Fantine, was released simultaneously in Brussels, Paris, St. Petersburg, London, Leipzig, and several other European cities. No book had ever had an international launch on this scale. Within a day, the first Paris printing of 6,000 copies sold out to the avid queues that snaked around the bookstores. 48,000 copies of the Cosette and Marius volumes went on sale a month later. Huguenot Fandom, that's the author of Les Mis, and Marius volumes went on sale a month later. Huguenot Fandom had reached such a fever pitch that shoppers in Paris arrived with handcarts and wheelbarrows to whisk away as many copies as possible. So, big change here. You know, we saw it with Shakespeare, at least, right? A national poet that can become like kind of a celebrity within his own country. But within the novel, we see writers become international celebrities. And then, to some level, we see them also become social political leaders. And what I would say with that is, in some cases, they, especially in Russian history, the writers have been, in many ways, some of their key social political leaders. Now, the other thing is, right, use of serialization, right? So if any of you are familiar with Les Mis, right, it's talking about the different parts. Fantine, Cosette, Marius. So it released it over time, right? So, you know, you could go and buy, right, the whole Les Mis, right? But it was released in these installments, right? And everyone was wondering about when is it going to come next, right? Well, here's the big thing I want to tell you, right? The influence of this still lives on today. Okay? Now, maybe you guys can remember with Percy Jackson, but I remember as a kid, okay, the same thing of, right, when there were shoppers going crazy over Harry Potter when it was being released over the years. People waiting, and you can look at lines or you can look at different images of that of people trying to get the copies. But the next installment of Harry Potter, when it was going to come out, and being there to get the first copies, okay? You know, my wife, for instance, even talks about how, you know, she went there one time to get one, and, you know, her sister also got one the same time, right? And Dad was like, well, why don't we just buy one? And they're like, no, because we're both going to be reading at the same time, and we have to get through it. So, right, they went home and then both read it. But, you know, that experience of I have to get to the book and get there and read through it. Something that comes from the novel, which we see from Les Mis and various other books. Now, a little more specific on the history of novels, and maybe I had a little too much fun here, but what do we mean by novels? So, if we look at England, right, let's talk about early examples. We might talk about more of manners, customs, and this one, even in this, right, it's still more of kind of the aristocracy kind of Britain, right? Pride and Prejudice and Emma, right? And there's just that movie that came out recently with that, Emma. Now, later ones, novels start to shift more towards realism. And so Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right? So even think about that, right? You know, little Tim, we're going to show the plight of little Tim and this, you know, terrible old guy that's rich and keeps all his money, right? And he has eventually the change of heart. Now, if you know anything more about Dickens, a lot of his characters focus on that. Great Expectations, which is about a boy named Pip, and he is from, you know, kind of lower class, and it's about him trying to basically work his way up actually into the upper class. And it's kind of a depressing story because basically his whole life is trying to impress this girl, this upper class, and the disappointment with that in some ways. Now, there's more you could add with that, but that's some. Now, if we turn to France, the biggest one here would be Victor Hugo, but the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Napoleon the Little, and the reason I put this one in here is the reason I said political leaders being social, or writers being social and political influences. This is one where he very critically, or where he went after very much Napoleon, and later he was exiled to kind of an island off kind of the coast by in between France, I believe, and Britain, if I remember correctly. But the point being, right, he had a huge influence in what he said. And then obviously Les Mis. Now, if you're curious about knowing about Les Mis, I know some of you are maybe familiar with the musical. How did that compare to the novel? Well, great example of showing realism. If you look at the musical, you'll know that there is two characters. And if you haven't looked at the musical, you have some work to do this week. You just need to listen through the whole thing or watch it or figure it out. Do something. Okay? So if you haven't seen Les Mis, you haven't lived. Okay? You haven't seen Fiddler on the Roof, you haven't lived. So after you've watched those two this week, then maybe you're alive, okay? And you can survive quarantine. So with Les Mis, there is kind of the evil characters you think through it. There's Javert, which is kind of the cop or a policeman, right? I'm not worried about him. But there's also these innkeepers, which are basically taking advantage of other people underneath them. And some of you know more of the story there. Well, in the musical, they are very humorous. They still do bad deeds, but they are very much comedic relief. And they have very silly songs and are goofy, zany kind of characters. Now, in Victor Hugo's story, that is not comedic relief. It is absolutely serious because he is showing how people are abusing one another in society. So someone, right, creating the kind of the social chaos at the bottom and destroying the lives of others for their own profit. So for him, it's very, very serious. It's realism. It's the novel through and through. Now, some of you may be like, well, how's that compared to America? So, well, we were greatly shaped by it. Hugo's novel was so successful that weary Southern soldiers serving under Robert E. Lee referred to themselves as Lee's Miserables, right? So I want you to think about, with the development of the novel, right? All of these were shaping one another: England, France, America, Russia, and a variety of others, but they were shaping each other. Now for us, if we think of novel, this is more of the romantic one, Moby Dick, right? A larger than life character, right? Going to meet a larger than life creature called a whale. Maybe you've heard that story. Uncle Tom's Cabin, well, some of you maybe know what Uncle Tom's Cabin is, but one of the most influential novels in American literature. Reason being, right, in particular, you note the time period here, 1852, well, depicting slavery, and in particular, the story of there's the story follows a lot of different things, but I mean, at one point you see this amazing moment of a mother fleeing and then having to basically jump across the Ohio River there. So I think it's from Kentucky to Ohio, if I remember correctly. She's moving from, right, where if she makes it to the other side, right, she will be a free person, right? She is not someone else's property. Now, free, I say free because even there, the story follows bounty hunters or people that are going to chase them down, even if they go up into the northern states. But think about this, a novel that depicts, right, what was going on in society, okay? Now, another one, Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, and Huckleberry Finn, realism. Okay, Mark Twain, some of you, maybe Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, you know the kind of story there. But you think about someone that captures real life on the Mississippi, a life that was defined by Mississippi. For us, some of you guys just don't, you're shaped more by the road. For Mark Twain, what defined his life was going down and up the Mississippi. So what he did is he tried to create these characters, right, traveling alongside of it, depicting a real life in some ways as it was. The novel, really fascinating development here, and super interesting. And I would leave with you one question is, something to think about is you could ask, where's the novel today? And that's where a lot of kind of, more kind of, professors and people would be debating is, there's one that says that, we've seen the death of the novel. What we used to know as truly the novel is dying. Others are saying, no, the novel is alive and well. So it's a continued debate about that. It's a good question to explore, right? Should we read a novel because it has such rich characters and engaging ones, but maybe the action or plot doesn't matter as much? Or, right, should we have more plot-driven novels? Right? Those are the kind of questions that are going on. And, I will tell you personally, there's a lot of novels I don't like. Right? And sometimes I have to recognize, it may be actually a good novel and I just don't like it. Some of that may be because it's doesn't really have a plot, or its plot I don't really like, but, right, it does give an insight into life and the human psyche. So as a personal example, I will share, I recently read one that was a Pulitzer winner from a few years ago, All the Light We Cannot See, and I was just blown away by the characters. There's some absolutely emotionally moving moments, but I also was frustrated with some of the plot, and in some ways it demonstrated perfectly the struggle of, what should, the novel be, and working through it. And, ultimately I was very happy that I read it and I learned from it, and it made me engaged and still thinking about it. And that's what a novel should do. It should make us think, not just entertain.